Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Gregory Arroyo, Editorial Director of Auto Dealer Monthly, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar, How to Easily Get Lawyers, Regulators, and Consumers on Your Side, presented by SecureClose. I encourage you to ask questions during the webinar at any point, and we will try to address them all. However, if we don't get to your question, don't worry, you'll be contacted via email with a response after the event. Our presenters today are Ace Christensen and Steve Levine. Ace is a 20-year industry veteran. He owns Rock Solid Auto Center in Mesa, Arizona. He's also the founder and chief visionary officer of SecureClose, which offers a solution designed to help dealers avoid the unnecessary pitfalls that are all too common during the loan closing process. It does this using an automated closing system that verbally walks customers through each closing document. The closings are recorded and stored in the cloud, allowing all parties involved to access the recordings at any time, essentially eliminating those he said, she said situations. Steve Levine is SecureClose's Chief Legal and Compliance Officer. He has 25 years of experience representing buy here, pay here dealers and finance companies. He is also the former Chief Legal and Compliance Officer for AutoStar Solutions. And he has also served as President of Southside Financial Group and General Counsel of Regional Acceptance Corporation. Steve is also a former board member of the National Automotive Finance Association and past chair of its legal committees. Now I'd like to hand it over to Ace and Steve. Take it away, guys.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Well, like Greg said, my name is Ace Christian, and I am a dealer first and foremost. I am one of the founders of SecureClose, and I created SecureClose because I had to make a change at my dealership based on what was going on in the market. So I'm excited about this presentation that we have for you guys. So let's go ahead and get started. Steve Levine, like Greg said, is the Chief Legal Officer for SecureClose, and he's also our Compliance Officer. So Steve, why don't you bring us up to date what's going on in the market and what's going on with regulators today?
Well, I'm sure as everybody knows, the CFPB has fundamentally changed auto finance in the last 3 years. I was at a recent conference and the CFPB official estimated that 25,000 dealers fall within its direct regulation. I don't know whether that number is right or wrong. It doesn't really matter because everybody in the industry is caught up now. If you're a finance company that purchases contracts, if you're a bank or another institution that provides capital, service providers, everybody's under that pressure because the regulation coming out of Washington is going downhill and affects everybody. Even worse, state regulators, plaintiffs' lawyers, everybody's been given a handbook. The CFPB has published what it thinks the best practices in auto finance are, and that's out there now. And as a result, you have lawyers that were never in this business before pursuing claims against dealers and finance companies. You have state regulators that were never interested in a lot of these issues before, now conducting very aggressive audits. So we're really in a perfect storm environment, and we as an industry need to adapt. You know, what does the CFPB really want? I think that's an interesting question. I was at a recent conference, and I posed that question to, there were executives from various finance companies. There were, just rank and file employees, just a whole bunch of people. And I started asking them, what do you think the CFPB wants? Everybody's complaining about the same thing, but what do you think they want? And we had a really interesting discussion about that, and I was surprised because I didn't find that there was a lot of commonality. I expected that all executives would say the same thing, and they really didn't. That they were all over the place and kind of what they expected. And, we have a flash poll. And I want to put this to the audience, and I want to ask you the same thing that we were presenting. What? You say over the last 3 years, the CFPB has fundamentally changed the auto finance. Is that because, in my industry, I've seen a lot of new car dealers coming into the business. Has that raised
our profile on the radar?
Yeah, I think it has. Let's face it, whether you're a new car franchise, whether you're an independent, whoever you are, that there's financing in the background someplace, and wherever that financing comes from, I think that's what's in the crosshairs. So yeah, it's new car dealers, it's everybody.
Yeah, what kind of pressure do you see being put on these finance companies that even if you're an independent dealer who's doing point of sale, or if you're a buy here pay here who has a receivable line of credit, what kind of pressure are these creditors starting to feel from the CFPB?
Oh, I think they're feeling tremendous pressure. And it's not just the folks that are under direct regulation. I'll give you an example. The CFPB did something really smart in its early days. It recognized that there was a problem with the credit reporting agencies and what was being put on people's credit. So what they did, instead of going after the hundreds or thousands of targets out there in the field, they really went after the credit reporting agencies and told the credit reporting agencies they needed to get in shape. So then the credit reporting agencies, that they basically came up with much more aggressive rules, and they handed those down to everybody accessing credit reports. So by doing that, they basically made a big change in the industry, and we're going to talk about that more in a little bit, because I think that there are plenty of examples of that where the CFPB has, instead of going after 100 or 1,000 people, that they've gotten great success just by doing what they're doing. So let's get back to what I was saying before. What does the CFPB really want?
Well, let's ask the audience what they think. Let's do a flash poll real quick. What does the CFPB really want? Is it transparency in dealing with the consumers so they are more informed? Is it a level playing field among dealers? Punishment of the bad guys? Or do they just want headlines and revenue? Or more favorable terms and conditions for the consumer? Let's go ahead and take a look at that.
Yeah, what do y'all think? Well, what does the CFPB really want?
Okay.
Wow.
Go ahead.
Transparency in dealings with consumers so they are more informed at 70%. And then more favorable terms and conditions for consumers at 20%. That's pretty compelling.
Right.
I'll tell you what I think they want. I think they want transparency. I think they want consumers to be informed. In talking to the folks that I was mentioning at this conference, and again, they were all over the place. They were executives. They were people that worked in various departments in finance companies, and they were all over the place.
Right.
Which tells me that people really don't know what the CFPB wants.
Right.
I think they want all of this.
Absolutely, and I agree with transparency because I just believe that a more informed or educated customer is a better paying customer. At least that's been my experience. The more my customer knows what's expected out of them, the better the results of that loan. So no, I agree with transparency. I think that's the biggest one.
So let me ask you, as a dealer, do you think that they want to punish the bad guys?
I don't think exactly that's their goal. I think that's a result of bad guys doing bad business. I think it's more that they're just trying to protect consumers. I mean, we don't want to have another 2008 to where, consumers are being misled and not knowing exactly what they're signing up for. I think that's the biggest thing.
Let me mention two things. Well, let me just mention two. When we talk about transparency, I want to be clear what we're talking about. I think it means being able as a consumer to understand and to be educated about your choices. For instance, there's been a lot of headlines about GPS and starter interrupt devices. And it's not so much that the devices themselves are being slammed or how they're being used. It's the fact that from a CFPB perspective, they've found a lot of cases where the consumers just weren't informed. They just didn't know. And that's a problem. I mean, the consumers need to be educated. I think if the industry does that, it's going to be way ahead of the game.
Yeah. Well, go ahead and tell us how can we, as car dealers, protect our businesses. I mean, I see here you got transparent process, educate and inform. Explain those a little bit.
Yeah, okay. Transparent process. I think a good example of transparency is menu selling of your add-on products. Menu selling has kind of demystified the process. And you used to read these horrible cases where some people as consumers would be presented with one option and then other people were presented with different pricing or different options. If you have menu selling and you do the same thing every time, that's transparent. Everybody has the same experience, and that's a good thing.
Right.
On top of that, if you have maybe a little handout that explains what the products are so that everybody's getting that same education, that's a good thing too. Giving consumers choice. I think that's something that the CFPB likes. Objectivity versus subjectivity. Being objective, treating everybody the same, giving everybody the same choices, so there's no subjectivity. I think that's important. And I think being able to demonstrate it is really important, and that's where you read a lot about these compliance management systems and handbooks and policies and training. When you're able to pull out a book and show that you're serious about this stuff and demonstrate that that's part of your business culture, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, not to jump ahead, but responsiveness to complaints. I mean, that's one of the things that has been a key in the way that I run my process now. Before, we didn't really have a process and the way to handle the complaints that we were getting from either consumers or the BBB or the Attorney General. Nowadays, what we're doing is we have a process in place, and I'll just really quickly go over. I had a couple of attorneys contact me, and now that I'm using the SecureClose process, I was able to go ahead and send them a copy of the video, and I actually had to call one of the attorneys back just to make sure that they got it because I never heard back. And when I talked to him, he's like, yeah, I got it. Okay, and what do we do now? We're done. So it was very good to have that and feel comfortable having a good process in place to where I was responsive to complaints and being able to know that I had said the right thing in the beginning of the sale. You know what I mean?
And I think having the ability to track your complaints, to categorize them, and then to be able to demonstrate that you were responsive and that you were consistent in your responses, I think that's all important today. It used to be that you kept a little yellow legal pad in your desk and maybe you wrote the stuff down, and now it's on an Excel spreadsheet, but it's all basically the same. I mean, you could buy a really robust management system to do this, or you could do it yourselves, but the point is to do it and be able to demonstrate it.
Okay, so now I got up on the screen a case study, the problem. Go over that a little bit with us and bring us up to speed what you mean.
Yeah, ACE is a great example of somebody that saw a problem in his business and decided to do something about it. And this is well before, he ever decided to set up a second business, SecureClose. He saw that he had a hole in his business, that when he was closing deals, customers didn't necessarily understand the terms that they were agreeing to. Leases, contracts, all the other paperwork, it's complicated, it's involved. There's a certain intimidation factor that customers suffer. And, the employees that a dealer has, a lot of times they've been given very basic training about the products being offered, but not really deep. So how do you communicate the right information and kind of close the knowledge gap so that you have informed customers that aren't, problems later? So, Ace, why don't you talk about what you saw and what you did?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with the first one. Customers need to understand the terms they agree to when they finance a vehicle, so problems can be avoided later. I mean, I used to close all my loans as many times. If I was there and we were closing, the finance contract, I wanted to make sure that I was the one that was doing it because I felt I was the best one to go over the information. I've gone over the paperwork several times with customers. Let's take, for example, the service contract. That's important. I sell a service contract. It's my own service contract, and I want to make sure that the customers, understand, because so many times, customers would come back and say, oh, my salesman told me it was bumper to bumper. And I'm like, no, I went over it with you in the closing room, and I explained the contract, And I got to the point where I started to test my customers. I would go over the service contract and say, okay, that was a service contract. Do you understand what's covered? Yes. Okay, let me ask you a question. Is the alternator covered? Yes. No, it's not. Let's go over it again, just to make sure. And it seems like even though they were looking at me, and I was sitting across from the table, and I was going over, and I thought I did a good job, they still, when they left the room or later on down the road, they acted like they didn't know. There was too much room for that human error to occur, And I think it's true that, a lot of our employees, they're not lawyers. I had an employee one time that was closing one of the arbitration agreements, and I was watching the video, because we used to record the videos with an external camera, and we had scripts, and the employee got to the point where he would go over the arbitration agreement. He said, listen, this is the arbitration agreement. It's an agreement that we agree that we will disagree sometime in the future. But I had a heart attack, And the other point, too, is that they're not robots. I mean, days where somebody who was, if I called in sick or another person called in sick, I'd be scared to death who was going to be closing the paperwork, And what happens if they quit? You spend a lot of money with employees to make sure that they're compliant and they know what they're doing, but if they quit or, they're not available, you got to start all over again with the whole process. So those are some of the things that, that I have dealt with as a dealer. So what's the solution?
And your response to that is you saw a process, you didn't like it, so you changed it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly right. I mean, I would close by the time I close the 7th loan or, 10th loan closing on a Saturday night, it's at 10 o'clock at night, my eyes are bleeding, from going over it and over and over and over again. And I got to be honest with you, my first closing in the morning was better than the one I did at night, because I was tired. I wanted to go home. I wanted to get out of there. And so I did me a discredit, and I did the customer, because I'm not a robot. I'm a human being. So, that's why I thought there's got to be a better way. So the solution, Steve, what do you think?
So you basically created software that creates a virtual closer and gives the scripts the same way every time, doesn't care who's sitting in front of them,
right.
Gives all the information that's needed. And I think that's great because that removes the consumer argument that, well, you didn't tell me this, you didn't tell me that. As an industry, we've spent 40 years trying to keep up with the he said, she said argument. We've got contracts that are, just voluminous to the point of ridiculous. We've got training scripts. We've got manuals that we put our employees through. We do all these things, that we tried recording, but the bad news about that is you recorded the bad as well as the good.
Right.
And we just haven't found we've never found a solution to the problem because litigation just kept increasing. So this is the kind of product that I think gives us a chance to show that we as an industry take this seriously and we are transparent and we are trying to pass information.
Oh, absolutely. And the same information to every customer every time is what I love about what I do now. And why do you think the customers are so responsive to the avatar or the fact that they're closing themselves? What do you think that's such? Because we are having such a better success because the customers are having a better experience. I mean, I don't know what it is or why this is happening, but customers think that this is a consumer protection tool, that it's there for them, and they're being more informed, and they're getting better information.
Well, it's an industry protection tool and it's a consumer protection tool because
Right.
It bridges that knowledge gap and puts everybody on the same page.
Yeah, and I feel so much better.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, that's one example.
Right.
You saw a problem, you built a solution. I think another good example of this is what's happened in the industry in the last 10, 15 years with credit underwriting.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that dealers use credit underwriting now to help their process. And the interesting thing to me is I don't know whether they're using it as a protection tool or whether they're using it because they're convinced that it's going to give them better performance, but one way or the other, they are using it. And just by way of curiosity, we've got another survey to deploy about credit reporting.
Well, we use
about credit underwriting. Okay.
Yeah, we use the scoring model just for the reason that you said, but it's only about 30% of our underwriting process. I mean, I still use the old underwriting process, deal structure, payment ability, past credit, that makes up the rest of it, but we do use a scoring model. And like Steve said, we have a poll now. I want to see where everybody else. Okay, everyone, let's see how many of you use a scoring system. So let's do a flash poll, okay? So the question is, do you use any sort of automated underwriting or scoring tool in your process? Yes or no? And like I said, we use it partially, for most of the reasons that Steve said, but because it is part of our underwriting process. But it is something that you can show, regulators that you are using a predictive underwriting scoring model, and I think that's a good backup for us. So what do we
So in our audience, 70% do use it, 30% don't. And the interesting thing to me about that number is I think if you went back 10 years, it would have been flip-flopped, and you would have had like 70% didn't and 30, So I think that's really interesting, and I credit that to, I think the companies that are out there that offer that tool have done a great job at building very robust tools.
Sure,
but I also,
I think it's important that, it's your business, stick to your business model, but use this as a way to show that you're not just being, you're not being, you're being objective, but you're using something else that is a system that helps you do the underwriting. So, all right, credit underwriting. Let's talk about collection technology a little bit here. What's your thoughts as far as collection technology?
I got to admit, I used to be one of those people that thought that the best way to collect was pounding the phones all day.
Mm-hmm.
And, just having collectors make call after call. I've done a 180 on this. I think that there's a lot of tools out there that help. And call queues, decision trees, automatic dialers if you're big enough. I think all those drive efficiency and protect the business, again, because they're objective, and somebody can't come back and say that, well, you treated me differently, you targeted me in some way. So I think as far as... Yeah,
the more automated...
I'll tell you one thing that I think the industry has a problem with is they have their collectors and what, whatever you're using, whatever system you're using, you have your collection experience, and then you have your collection letters. And a lot of times, as an industry, we don't link those together, and we kind of create just an inefficient, inconsistent experience for customers. For instance, they get a collection letter that says one thing, and then they're talking to a collector and it says something else. I think that's a bad experience.
Absolutely. And I'm a believer now. The more automation, the more structure you provide for your employees, the more efficient they can be, and really focus on those customers who are really falling behind. In the past, before we automated my collectors, we would spend a lot of time, or they would spend a lot of time on a Monday or Tuesday calling those 1 to 3 day, because those are the easiest ones, but the 10-day plus was always the last thing that they would work on, but those should have been the first thing that they would work on. Now, the way our system works, it selects it for them based on what the supervisor makes a priority. And really today's customers, they don't like that face-to-face interaction when they're late. They don't want to talk and talk and talk about what's going on, but they will text a response quicker. And with the IVR system that we're using, they know that when they call back, they don't have to talk to a collector, that they can just go ahead and make the payment without talking to anybody. And what I really like is the reoccurring setup that we have too. It just eliminates all that human interaction that we have with our customers. And we remove the opportunities for conflict. I believe the more you remove the human element out of the emotional situations, the better protected you are as a company.
So you use IVR, you use texting. I take it you take payments on your website?
Absolutely. No, absolutely.
Yeah, so you're really giving customers a lot of choices about how they want to pay.
Absolutely, yeah. So some other high-risk identifiers are these start or interrupt GPS. I mean, boy, I mean, the last few years, they've just been high-profile situations. Why don't you talk about those a little bit for us?
Yeah, like I said, I'm not so sure whether it's the devices themselves or whether it's the fact that there have been some horrible examples where the customer was just never informed. You know, gosh, it was probably 18, 20 years ago. I got a call from a company. This is like the early stage of this technology. And, you know, they wanted my thoughts about how to go to the marketplace with this. And I said, disclose, disclose, disclose. Have the customer sign, 10 times that they understand how this is going to be used. And that advice hasn't changed. The devices have changed a lot, but that advice to the industry hasn't changed. Make sure that the customers are being informed. Make sure that you're being transparent.
Yeah, the disclosure is what I agree with. I mean, here's the thing. I sell it to my customers. I mean, the benefits of having a GPS and starting up for just insurance purposes alone. If the vehicle gets stolen, we'll know where it is. We can shut it off and we can assist you. It'll reduce your insurance premiums because you have it. I guess it's kind of like LoJack, you know what I mean? And then with the device that we have, we give our customers a pad because the GPS start interrupt system that we have provides our customers with a 24-hour emergency pad. Even if they haven't paid us, they can use it. And I think that helps a lot with the compliance and with the CFPB, knowing that our customers do have a choice. I mean, they know if they push that 24-hour button, 24 hours later the car won't start. So they're calling us now more than ever. And my goal is to have, my SecureClose, the way it's laid out to the customer, the whole product, is what it does, how it's used. Just get real with your customers. Let them know. You really don't want to have to call them if they're delinquent, but guess what? The car is going to shut off. So everyone out there, let's see how many of you guys use either a start interrupt or a GPS device. Let's do a flash poll again, and I'll read the question to you. Do you currently use start interrupt GPS devices? Yes or no? The devices, we used to just use GPS at one point, but now we use the whole gamut because we found that it has a better result and lowers our cost as far as repossessions. Saturdays are becoming less and less the big days that we collect. It's now Wednesday because we shut the cars off on Tuesday, Wednesday if they're late. And it's really helped us as far as getting customers to call us. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the results. Steve, do you see those results?
Yeah, we don't have many respondents, but we have 100% are using those devices. I mean, I think it's become, now it's changed. Now 60% yes, about 39% no.
I would strongly encourage everybody to use a GPS starter, at least if you're in the buy here, pay here business. That's interesting.
But let me throw a challenge out. Let me throw a challenge out to everybody, and this is whether you're a buy here, pay here, retail lot, finance company, whoever it is. If you're doing business with starter interrupt devices, I want you to read the disclosures that the consumers get and make sure that they're clear. I'm always surprised how little the ultimate users understand about what they're using. Make sure that you read this stuff and you understand, and if you need to, push back, because ultimately you're the ones that are going to suffer the consequences of bad customer experience.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Challenge. It's a challenge.
All right, another high-risk business practice, credit reporting. I know you and I go back and forth on this one. Why don't you talk about that real quick?
I think credit reporting is the single biggest danger out there today for anybody doing it, just because it is so under the radar of the CFPB, and now you have, I was talking to a dealer that had a state audit recently, and they were digging into their practices on reporting and their responsiveness. So, I mean, this is just something that has gotten so much publicity, and people know to ask. So,
and it's the lack of training and education that you got up here on the slide. I mean, I agree with that 100%. Until I sent my closer, the person who used to close all my contracts before SecureClose, he's now my compliance manager. I sent him to NAF to get trained. I was really concerned if we were compliant or not with our reporting. Everything we're supposed to do, you know. My DMS that I used did a good job of keeping records of payments, and it was compliant. But the other issues like, you know, 1099 issuances, settlements, payoff, other dealers' payoffs, I was really concerned me. I mean, we use the credit report for underwriting purposes mostly to make sure that, you know, we're not dealing with any credit criminals, you know what I mean? And if the history on the report matches the other reports that we use, like TLO, to do our underwriting. Also, we want to be competitive, especially today, by offering the benefits of reporting customers good credit. You know, finally, we wanted to make sure that if our customers do go to a competitor or to another dealership to trade in their car, that we need to be on the credit report, because in the past when we weren't on the credit report, competition would tell our customers, like, they're not even on the credit report, just go take it back to them, just go ahead and turn it in. So, you know, those are the reasons why I personally use the credit report, both for underwriting and for reporting and for protection. So I'm curious, let's take another poll and see how many people actually report credit. Let's do this flash poll again. So the question is, do you report to the credit reporting agencies? Yes, no, and I'm a buy here, pay here dealer. No, because I don't hold my own paper. So let's go ahead and do that. And again, like I said, you know, for me, it's a combined interest. I do it for underwriting, and I also do it to keep up with the competitors, you know, and show that I can build value with my dealership by reporting the credit. So do we have the results yet back? Let's see here. Is everybody asleep out there? There we go. Let's see. Do you see the results, Steve?
Not yet. I still see the results for the last one.
Okay.
Well, while we're doing this, let me just mention something. You mentioned the NAF training. That's the National Auto Finance Association, and they have a great training course on a whole bunch of compliance-related issues. You can get your people certified. If you don't want to go through all of that, you know, depending on the size of your business, you may or not want to do that, but the credit reporting agencies themselves have a lot of information online. They have a lot of materials. They also have classes. So I think all of that is something that everybody needs to look into, because I think that the First Investors and Drive Time consent decrees with the CFPB, both of them really stressed that as industry participants, you're going to be measured on the kind of resources that you invest in this, and it's got to be commensurate with the size of your business. If you're a big institution and you have 1 or 2 people doing this, that's going to be a problem. You know, if you're a small institution, that's going to be okay. But if you're a big institution, you better staff it accordingly. You better give them the training. The days of responding to every complaint with, well, yeah, we looked at our DMS, and that's the information that we show, so we're right. Yeah, those days are over. That's not sufficient enough.
Well, with my lot, I'm a little lot. You know, I'm doing 50 to 60 cars a month, and I really didn't have the staff. But like I said, when I started using this product to close the finance paperwork, all of a sudden I had a person who was already on payroll who was available. And so we just switched him over, and now he really enjoys, you know, keeping us compliant. So it looks like the results are in for the survey. 55.6% do report, 5.6 don't, and they're buy here, pay here, and it looks like 38.9% because they don't hold their own paper. It's interesting. Okay, so now let's talk about the other last high risk, the retail installment contract and lease form versus the DMS. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, let me just dive into this a little bit, explain what I mean here, because this is a little bit, oh gosh, almost counterintuitive. You know, everybody uses retail installment contracts. Sometimes it's a big company like Wolters Kluwer. Sometimes it's a small company. I encourage everybody, if you're creating your own, you better make sure that you have a law firm that does that every day of the week, creating them for you, and not just think you're going to pirate somebody else's form and do it yourself. So you have these contracts, you have these leases. That's all fine and good, but how do they interact with your dealer management system or whatever other software you're using to run their business? Are they consistent? I've seen many cases over the years where you have contracts that say one thing, and your system says something else, and that's a plaintiff lawyer's dream. Regulators go crazy when they see those audits. It creates class action potential, and it's a huge problem. So you need to make sure, where do these forms come from? Do they have somebody standing behind them? And do they match the business practices? Do they match the software or whatever else you're running them on? And if you have any doubt, you should be asking your vendor, do you support this?
Yeah, that's why I said, do forms being used contradict each other? Boy, you need to watch out for that. I mean, I just went through this. It wasn't a big deal, but I just went through this with our deductible requirement for insurance. Our retail installment contract had the amount of $500 as deductible amount, and our CPI form had $250, so they were contradicting each other with that. And you're right also, you need to make sure that any third-party provider you or your DMS uses forms are updated. I was helping a dealer out a couple months back that uses a payment device GPS, and when I was reviewing his deal jacket with him in the forms, I noticed that the form he was using for his GPS start and interrupt was from 2013. Well, the third party that issued him the form had 3 updates since that in the last 2 years, and one of the updates was significant to his business that he needed to disclose certain items, and he hadn't been for the last 2 years.
See, that's a great example of you start doing business with somebody, you get comfortable, and
Right.
you never get proactive and ask the questions. And things do change, and you have to be up to speed. Your example about the different deductible amounts.
Yeah.
If a regulator looks at that, they would say that you're not being transparent, and maybe even say, boy, they're trying to hide the ball. And that we as an industry have to understand we're under a greater level of scrutiny and we have a bigger responsibility than ever before. I always encourage folks, look at your business through the eyes of a consumer. Look at every piece of paperwork. Look at every origination piece of paperwork, down through every collection letter. Are they consistent? If you were having this experience as a customer, how would you feel about it? What's the experience that the customer's going to see? Because you're right. If the customer's happy, if the customer feels like they've been treating fairly, they're going to be a better payer,
Right.
better performance.
And that's one of the takeaways, that I was hoping we would communicate to everybody on to protecting your dealership. And I've got, the slide up right now that says identify business practices to audit, identify practices where there are no published policy and procedures. Now, Steve, what would you recommend to someone like me who has just one location, about 20 employees, getting all these policies? Is there a place that has, that we could go to for just like job description, policy manuals, days off? And
Well, let me give you a cautionary tale. Years ago, I'm defending a dealer in a lawsuit, and the consumer's lawyer asked for the policy and procedures manual. So my client shows up with and it's a big book. I'm kind of surprised because this is a small dealer. He's got a big old book. So I look at it and I'm like, yeah, policy procedure manual of so-and-so company. I'm like, wow, this is great. So I turn the page, and he took somebody else's manual and just put his name on the front. And the other company was listed like 100-something times in the rest of the manual. And needless to say, that case didn't go very well.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I've
a lot of people do that.
And looked at it. Is there so like we had mentioned the NAF. Is there training courses on compliance that you would recommend besides the NAF? Or
yeah, I mean,
we all got to have a.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Let me tell you what I wouldn't do first. I wouldn't go online and be an internet lawyer and think that you're going to find the answers that way. Complete is a really good company that has forums and practices.
Is that Complete?
Complete, COMPLI.
Okay.
There's plenty of other companies that offer that. There's a lot of ex-regulators that are now compliance professionals, and they could help you with that. The problem that everybody wants to do, though, is everybody just wants to be able to, buy it off the shelf quickly. And that's a problem because it doesn't match what your practices are. So you really need to look at what your practices are, what you do, and come up with a manual to match. It doesn't have to be, $10,000, $20,000. It doesn't have to be $5,000. If you're a small lot like you, 20-something employees, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. But I challenge everybody: audit yourselves. Do you have it? Do you know where to grab it? Do your employees know about it, or does it just sit on a shelf someplace? If I were running a dealership, what I would do is I'd have a robust manual. And every 6 months, I would test my employees on it, and I would keep the test results in their employees' file. Yeah. And that way, if anybody ever comes and says, boy, you have a culture of non-compliance, you're being negligent, you could say, no, wait a second. I'm trying to run my business the right way, and I could document it, I could prove it. I think that is huge. That is a great, valuable takeaway.
And there's a lot of information out there, and there's a lot of rules and changes being made in the market, and that's another reason why I wanted to have this product available for, people who are like me in the industry. I don't care if there's 2 of you and you're selling 15 cars a month. You've got to be transparent. You've got to be compliant. I mean, would you say, Steve, that no matter who you are, no matter where you are, if you're in the used car business, you're affected by the regulators and what's happening today? Would you agree with that?
Oh, unquestionably. Yeah, I get so frustrated when I talk to some folks and they just have the opinion that, well, I'm never going to get audited. I'm never going to get a visit from the FTC, the CFPB, whoever. That's the wrong way to look at it, because right now, unless you are completely on an island and you
right.
completely self-fund, you're getting your money from somewhere. And guess what? They're under a lot of scrutiny, and they get their money from someplace else, and they're under scrutiny. So all this stuff that you read about that you don't think affects you, it really does, because you're going to have to answer the questions one way or the other. I mean, in the last couple of years, I have gotten more good conversations with dealers, asking pointed questions about how we do business. How do I respond to regulators? Yeah. How do I prepare myself if somebody walks in the door? What do I do if my bank calls me and says, hey, we're auditing you? Those are the types of questions you need to be asking yourself, because it's going to happen. If you get your money from any place, somebody's going to want to know that. And the types of things that we talked about here today, everything from form contracts and DMSs and credit reporting and collections, that's all stuff you need to have answers to, because somebody's going to ask at some point.
Yeah, I think in a recent article you said something like it was important to protect your dealership today. I mean, don't wait until something happens, because that's a plan that will really hurt you in the long run. You need to be proactive.
If you're doing business like it's 2005 and none of this is ever going to affect you, you're going to lose, and you're betting your livelihood on it.
And I've always tell everybody it's important in this business, in our business, guys, to monitor, track, and maintain your business with a proactive perspective. I mean, if you find yourself always reacting to the changes in the market, you need to make every effort to make a change and change that way of doing business. And you already have. By attending this webinar, other things that will help is subscribe to trade publications, keep up on what's going on in the market, join your local state association, and go to as many conferences that you can. And I mean, you go. Don't send people. If you're an owner or you're somebody who's going to get burnt the worst, you need to be there yourself. Too many times I'm at conferences and I see, owners who don't attend because they're overwhelmed of everything that's going on at their dealership, that they send employees. And those employees aren't going to be concerned about what's going on or the new techniques coming out as you would be. So, always attend the conferences if you can. And look at the content that they provide. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
I had a great conversation with somebody a couple of weeks ago. I made a comment, probably more than a year ago at a conference that y'all bring employees here, test them. And
right.
I talked to somebody that actually was doing that. He brought a couple of people to a conference, and he was making them make a test afterwards, and he assigned them each classes. I think that's a great way to do it. I mean, that is a very cheap, economical way to educate your staff and make sure they're up to snuff.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's all the time that we have. I want to thank everybody who attended. Steve, it's always a pleasure talking to you. If there's any questions, we can go ahead.
Yeah, do you want to try to do a couple of questions?
Yeah, I think I'll take it. I'll pose these questions. Hey, thanks, guys. Great stuff. And just, you mentioned conferences. We have our industry summit conference coming up in September 8th through 10th. We'll be talking a lot about this stuff. But let's get to some questions. Let's see. Actually, we have a question here kind of specifically about SecureClose. The audience member asked, will you give a more specific description of how the avatar discloses a retail installment contract?
Well,
Ace, you want to take that, or you want me to?
Yeah, why don't you go for it? I mean, you're the one that wrote the words that comes out of the avatar mouth, so you go ahead and hit that one.
Yeah. What it basically does is it tells the customer, this is a retail installment contract. It governs your payment obligations of the financing you're getting here today. This is what default means. This is what your responsibilities are. And it really does it in just a quick, concise, couple-of-minute way that answers the consumer's questions, and better yet, captures that experience to where it could be played back later. And I've been writing scripts a good part of my career, and the thing I'm really excited about, this is the first time that I'm confident that my script is being delivered the way I've written it. Because what happens is usually I write it, I give it to the dealership, and then they ad-lib.
Absolutely. I've always, dreamed about having somebody, what it would be like having a lawyer closing all of my retail installment contracts. And that's basically what I have. So to answer the question the specific descriptions is it goes over each section of the retail installment contract in a way that the customer can understand, but from an attorney's perspective.
Yeah. Well, this question actually came up a little early on when you guys were talking about transparency, and I don't know if maybe you've covered that already, but the audience member asked, what exactly is transparency? Can you give some real-world examples? I don't know if you guys feel like you covered it, but if you have some real-world examples, I'm sure the asker, the person who posed the question, would enjoy hearing that.
Yeah, I mean, there's no magic formula, magic definition for transparency, but I think that the menu selling is a great example. If you go back, 10 or 15 years, that wasn't the practice, and people were generally confused. And now, if everybody's getting that same information with the same options and the same pricing, there's really not a lot of room to say, well, you treated me differently, or I didn't know this. So I think transparency is a great example. I think Ace's example about having two documents that said two different things, I think that's a really good example of an experience that is not transparent to the consumer. So when I talk about transparency, it's not one piece of paper. It's looking at everything that goes on at your dealership and asking yourself, is there room for confusion here, or is the customer getting good information and it's consistent information?
Right, and I got to be honest with you, if it wasn't for SecureClose and the review that the staff does of the documents, I probably wouldn't have caught that, especially on my CPI form, because the CPI form, it's important. It's you don't sell CPI; it's offered to consumers, who don't either have insurance or if they default on insurance. And I think SecureClose does a way better job explaining that to consumers than I or any other of my employees. So
yeah, and it's really simple. It just says if you don't have this required insurance, we could purchase it and charge it to your account. And the other nice thing is, you're not going to have an argument with the customer about it.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and one of the things I keep joking about with people is ever since I've started using this, I haven't heard any customers. Well, a couple things. One, it's been a long time since I've had a BBB and AG, and number two, I haven't had customers come in who say, my salesman told me it was bumper to bumper and everything was covered from now until the end of time. Ever since I've had this and using this, that's gone away. We were sitting around as managers the other day going, when was the last time we've heard that? And the only thing we can point to, and the better performance of our portfolio, is using SecureClose. And I can't tell you why, and I'm hoping later on in life, a year down the road, I'll be able to put my finger right on it. But something is going on, and and the only thing I can think of is the time we started using this product. So,
Right.
I hope that wasn't too sales pitchy out there, guys. So, but it's the truth. I can't help it. I'm excited, you know.
Right.
Something actually works.
Here's another question. How does a credit scoring system help with adverse action?
I'll give you a good example about that. I had a client once that got sued for their credit reporting, and turns out that basically their argument was everybody in here gets the same adverse action reasons. Because everybody has not enough income, too much debt, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That doesn't go very well when you're hauled into court. That's really hard to make that argument. So if you have a good model, it gives you some strong, consistent adverse action reasons that you could defend. Basically, it's just good defensible information, that it's looking at the same information, it's not being subjective, it's being very objective, and it's spitting out reasons. You know, so really it's that simple. It's just another arrow in your arsenal if you ever get attacked.
You know, early in the presentation, you guys mentioned about multiple payment options. An audience member is asking, are you referring to weekly, bi-weekly, or excuse me, bi-monthly, monthly, etc.? I guess they want to know what you mean by multiple payment options.
Yeah, but by multiple payment options, talking about methods that the customer could use to pay. It's not really the terms of the contract. You know, the dealership or finance company needs to pick the business model terms that work for them in terms of monthly, biweekly, et cetera. But what I'm talking about is, do they have to come into your dealership money in hand, or could they go to your website, or could they call an IVR? Or could they pay by text? I mean, there's a lot of technology out there that, again, Ace was saying, it just takes the adversarial out of the equation. And if you take the adversarial out of the equation, you're left with, you know, pleasant experiences and repeat customers. So it's just giving customers all these different options.
Yeah, and I think today, especially with the millennium, they don't like to have that interaction as much. You know, they like to stay away from, you know, actually having to interact with people. And that's why I've been getting a better result out of texting. I guess that's what the reason is, because people respond quicker to text, like, okay, I'm going to make my payment tomorrow. And that's all they want to say. You know, they don't want to have to go into why they're late and all that. They'll just respond that way. And it's working better for us because now I have it documented too. So.
All right.
You know, one question that I've gotten, I just want to touch upon this, is you know, what does SecureClose have to do with collections? Because we talk to people about how it transforms the business, and it actually has a lot to do with collections. Ace, you want to do that, or you want me to?
Well, like I said, I don't know the exact things that are happening, but my collections, my performance of my portfolio is getting better. And I haven't changed my staff. I didn't hire different people. I don't have new managers. I'm not doing anything different. And the only thing that we can put our finger to is when we started to use this product. And it just seems that the customers are more informed. They know that there isn't going to be any he said, she said, or miscommunication. And the great thing about it is our customers have access to watch the video anytime they want. They can go back over if there was something they didn't understand or anything like that. And we do, you know, we do a long presentation. Our closing is about 30 to 35 minutes. I mean, when I used to do it myself, it would be longer. And I know 35 minutes sounds like a long time, but when the customers are in control of the closing and they're doing it themselves, for some reason, they have better understanding and they're performing better because they know what their obligation is. And our customers, again, like I said, from the privacy of their home or from their cell phone or whatever, they can go ahead and review and watch not a video of a closing, their actual closing. The one that they did with them sitting, they see themselves, they see the information, and they go, oh, I remember that part, yeah. Because
and that's really helpful in collections when your customers call in collections saying, well, you didn't tell me this, and your collectors know that you use the product, and they're able to say, well, yeah, you remember sitting in front of the computer, you know, go to the 5-minute mark and we talk about that.
Yeah, Steve, you said educated. I think that's what we're doing. Maybe that's it, because the customers they're kind of like, they don't say to us, you didn't say that anymore. What they're saying is, if I remember right, or don't I have to do X, Y, Z? Oh, yes, you do. Are my options to do this? Yes, you can do it that way too. They're coming to us with more information. I don't know why. That's just what's happening. Like I said, a year from now, I hope to be able to put my finger right on why we're having such a great success with, and why these customers interact better with avatars than they do employees. So,
here's another question.
One more question? Great.
Yeah, I think we do. Here, well, let's see. Here's one. What can I do to protect myself from credit reporting liability?
You know, that's a hard one to answer because I don't know a lot about the individual business. The best advice I could give is, who in your place is responsible for that function? When was the last time you sent them to training? How well educated are they on the issues that are out there? You know, there's a lot of information on Experian.com, the other credit reporting agencies' websites. There are classes that you could go to. If you really want to take this seriously, you need to look into doing those things. It's really complicated. I mean, a lot of this stuff, when it comes to how you report certain events, it's complicated. And don't think you could just rely on my system says that's the right answer, so it is. That's not sufficient.
Right. And I just wanted to say, kind of looking at the questions and everything, one more thing. The product the SecureClose product I use called Elite is customized. The reason why I think we're having success is because we can be transparent, but we can be real with the customers and address those issues that have been confusing over the years. Exactly what happens when I turn the vehicle in. Is that a repo? Well, I turned the vehicle in. I shouldn't know you anymore. You got your car back. Educating the customer on what a repossession is, at least for my dealership, in customizing exactly what that means in my SecureClose, has helped me out a lot to relieve that question. So, you know, what you walk away with this is that, you know, you can customize this in certain aspects depending on what product you use or what kind of industry you're in, to make sure that it hits home to your market and the people that you serve.
Great.
So that's it. All right.
Well, thank you guys. Really appreciate great presentation. That is all the time we have today. If we did not get to your question, Ace, Steve, and the SecureClose team will be following up via email to answer your questions individually. We hope that you all enjoyed today's webinar. I want to thank again Ace Christian, Steve Levine, and the SecureClose team for today's presentation. I also want to remind everyone that this webinar will be available through both the Auto Dealer Monthly and F&I and Showroom websites under the Events Web Seminars tab. Thank you and have a great day.